After News Hour from the BBC World Service, I'm Razia Iqbal. Fighting continues in the northern Mozambique town of Palma, where dozens of people have been killed in an attack by Islamist militants. We hear from the controversial private security firm fighting.
Make sure your car is close to the left and you stop just before the line and you make effective observations before you go. See the speed limit change, it's a temporary speed limit sign, but it must be observed.
People like to talk about change, but things are burning down, and people are breaking into malls, and when all of that dies down, the call for change dies down too, unfortunately.
And 150 years of spectacle, shows and showing off at the Royal Albert Hall. First news.
Hello, this is Julie Campbell with the BBC News. The Dutch salvage company leading the operation to refloat the giant container ship which has been blocking the Suez Canal for the past week says the main challenge is still ahead. Earlier, tugboats managed to free the stern of the 400-metre-long Evergreen from the shoreline. However, the bow remains stuck. Theo Leggett reports.
Disruption to global trade will not end with the refloating of the Ever Given. According to Lloyd's list, there are currently more than 370 ships waiting to pass through the canal, including container vessels, tankers and bulk carriers. Clearing that backlog is expected to take several days. Some ships have already left the region, preferring to take an alternative, longer route around the southern tip of Africa. They'll be joined by other vessels travelling from East Asia to Europe, whose operators have decided not to risk waiting for the canal to
Adjust
reopen.
your speed
The
accordingly.
jury in the American
Once
city
you've
of
left the
Minneapolis is due
roadworks.
to hear the opening arguments in the trial of a white police officer accused of killing George Floyd during his arrest.
I'm going to turn right at the traffic lights.
Manslaughter and 2 counts of murder. There's heavy security around the court building, with soldiers from the state's National Guard being deployed.
I'm going to do a lane
Floyd's
change
brother,
around here.
Lois Floyd, speaking to the CBS television network, paid tribute to those who'd supported last year's protests for his brother George.
That's the blind spot detection system. If you don't know what it is, you need to ask me.
They put their lives on the line for what was right, and I want to thank them for that. The community is doing everything they can to make sure we get a conviction.
Somebody's warm.
Because they always said and they always stated, no justice, no peace. They march.
The Thai Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha has said his country is preparing for a potential flood of refugees from Myanmar following the military coup there. His comments came after 3,000 people from Karen State in eastern Myanmar crossed the border into Thailand following airstrikes by the Burmese army. James Rodehaver from the Myanmar office of the United Nations Commissioner for Human Rights says the international community needs to get involved.
My team within the United Nations will continue to gather information and evidence to try and show that this violence has been a graduated use of lethal force against peaceful protesters over a very wide area. So it's been widespread and it's been systematically introduced. These are potentially crimes against humanity.
Egypt's public prosecutor has ordered the arrest of 8 railway employees after Friday's fatal train collision. At least 18 people were killed.
Make sure you're in your lane.
Injured in southern Sohag province.
Check your mirrors.
When one
Confirm your
speeding train
position's
hit
correct.
another, sending a carriage into the air. World news from the BBC. 3 former pilots in the Ivorian Air Force have gone on trial in Paris over an airstrike that killed 9 French peacekeepers in Ivory Coast in November 2004. An American aid worker was also killed and some 40 people injured. 2 Ivorians and a Belarusian are being tried in absentia. A French drug firm that kept selling an appetite-suppressant pill for a decade after health risks were flagged up has been convicted of aggravated deception. It's been linked to hundreds of deaths, as Lucy Williamson reports.
When you're turning right here, make sure you can
France.
re-evaluate your vanishing point.
Sale in the 1970s. It was prescribed
If you
to
don't know what your
5
vanishing
million
point
people,
is,
much of the
you're not
time as
paying
an
attention to your
appetite
driving
suppressant.
lessons
It
with
was
me.
withdrawn from sale in 2009, but that was more than a decade after concerns had first surfaced about potential links to serious heart problems. Today, the court found that Servier Laboratories was guilty of aggravated deception, manslaughter and accidental injury, but was acquitted of fraud.
Delivering the verdict, the presiding judge said that Sevier had known about the risks for many years without acting and had weakened trust in the health system.
Johnson & Johnson says it will supply up to 400 million doses of its vaccine to the African Union's member states. The jab is a single shot, which should simplify its rollout in comparison to other current vaccines which require a second dose. Delivery will begin later in the year for 220 million doses. Protesters on the Greek island of Lesbos have picketed the European Union Commissioner for Home Affairs, Ylva Johansson, over plans for new migrant centres. Residents gathered in the island's capital, Mytilene, as she arrived for a visit. They don't want the government to build any more refugee facilities after years of conflict over the overcrowded Moria camp, which disgruntled migrants burned down in September. BBC News.
Hello, I'm Razia Iqbal. Welcome to NewsHour from the BBC World Service. It comes to you live from London. We begin today in the southern African country, Mozambique, where there has been a brutal conflict in the northern Cabo Delgado province for the last 3 years between the government and Muslim insurgents. The insurgents are thought to have loose ties to the Islamic State group, but in the area...
It's a closed junction. Be very careful when you're emerging and be aware of any car approaching and turning into this road. The speed limit's 20 on this road, but because there's no speed bumps, no traffic calming measures, as in physical measures, be aware that people could be driving very fast on this road. It's very rare. It can happen.
Security forces say dozens of people have been killed in the attack on Palma further north. It is a murky conflict which involves a South African company, the Dyke Advisory Group, taken on by the government to fight the Islamists. We'll speak to the man who runs it, Lionel Dyke, in a moment. Let's hear this report first from the BBC's Africa correspondent, Catherine Biarahanga.
Once again, a community terrorized by years of violence had to quickly flee. On this street, motorbikes made a quick dash, and young men and women fled towards the ocean. Live rounds and mortar shells have been let loose in Palma as local Islamist insurgents
look at the junction. Be aware that cars could turn in and go over the line.
Dozens were killed.
Because you can't see, make sure you at least make effective observations and reduce your speed to an almost stop, or ideally stop if you can do.
She is worried for his safety and describes this as a horrible and unfair situation. A fleet of civilian boats and ships was hastily put together to rescue survivors stranded on beaches and at a large natural gas plant run by the French company Total. Online maritime traffic data showed a hive of activity near Palma.
There's 2 lanes that develop here. Keep an eye on the red car as well.
When Adrian walked into a room, you were happy.
South African Merrill Knox's son, Adrian Nell,
Still 30.
was killed in an ambush as he tried to escape from a hotel. Her husband and younger son made it out of the town alive, but she says they were left to their own defenses.
You can imagine no army to protect them, none of them having weapons, so it was a matter of run for your life.
Gonna turn right at the roundabout. You'll see how I position myself as early as I possibly could. The roundabout looks
The
clear.
Mozambican army has been silent for days about the ongoing crisis, leading to even more criticism about its response. But on Sunday night, security spokesman
limit's changed.
Saranga said they were working towards restoring peace in the area.
This is a road where people with sports cars open up their engines. If you don't understand what that means, you are not paying attention to your driving lessons with me. van in front of you slowing down, it means the traffic lights are on red.
Mozambique's security forces and politicians have struggled to rein in the insurgency in the Cabo Delgado region. This latest attack, so close to natural gas projects with massive international investments, will put it under even more pressure to get it under control.
And that report was from Catherine Yarahanga. Well, just before we came on air, we got through to Lionel Dick.
Now look at which lane is making most progress.
Taken on by the government of Mozambique to fight the militants. He told me about his company's involvement in the last few days.
We went into Palma when the fight started the other day. We went in with limited fuel and limited ammunition because we
He's on his phone, the DPD driving. His wife's constantly braking.
Actually over a year. There was nobody else.
You can't concentrate on driving and use the phone at the same time.
So we went up there, we managed to get fuel from people on the way up, and we got stuck into the fight, which was quite fierce. And we suppressed a lot of the insurgents running around to, stop them shooting people. But there were a lot of headless bodies on the ground. They'd hit a food convoy, which might have been why they launched at that time, because they launched at the beginning of what's called the fighting season. And I think they've had the whole wet season to set themselves up. It's quite professional, 3-pronged attack, and very well armed.
And your company had what at their disposal?
We had 3 Gazelle helicopters and an Alouette as gunships, and 2 Squirrel helicopters, 4 passenger helicopters we used for search and rescue.
Was this the most fierce fighting that you've been engaged in since you began your contract with the government?
In Mozambique, yes.
And just tell me a little bit about the rescue operation, because you were involved in that with regard to the hotel and the people who were holed up there.
So there was a big sign asking for help at the Alrola Hotel. They went over there and they suppressed a lot of fire around the hotel. One of our squirrels then landed and started taking people out. We took out, I think, about 20 before fuel and light ended. Our people suggested to people in Amarillo that they were reasonably safe, that they should stay in there. They obviously didn't after we left, and hence that convoy fiasco took place.
And as far as you know, regarding the convoy and the ambushing of the convoy, how many people have been killed and how many do we know are still missing?
Some of the vehicles made it down to the beach. We found one vehicle with a dead person. We believe about 7 people were killed in that attempt to get out. And the one dead lying on the road was a South African. And subsequently, we found the other occupants of that vehicle that were hiding in the bush. We took them all out early the next morning.
And as far as you are aware, what is happening on the ground at the moment?
Well, it's they're still fighting. There are skirmishes all the time.
It's a very busy roundabout.
From them now.
Because it's very busy, you're going to get opportunities, but you've got to see them as they evolve, as they develop. Not when they've actually developed. Once it's developed and you're going to go, it's going to be too late. So you need to see when the opportunity develops and then go. Right now, maintain your lane.
And they come out and they shoot at the aircraft, and they have hit and shot at our aircraft often. Over.
And I just wonder if you are able to say to us, you say that skirmishes are still taking place. In your view, who is controlling Palma at the moment?
We not.
So do you think it's the insurgents who have the upper hand?
Yeah, they've got the initiative at this time, and until we put sufficient troops in there to clear them out of the houses of Palma, they will remain in control, because there's no way anybody can get into the town of Palma to re-establish anything until these people are cleared out. And it is their habit to live in amongst the people. This particular group, although they're uniformed or have their black pajamas on, are in amongst the people. So until a house-to-house clearing operation is taking place, this will be a long time before Palma is livable.
What is it that you, as a company, give the government that they don't have with their own security forces and their own armed forces?
They don't have the ability to have an air effort at all. They have no working aircraft, and an insurgency like this requires flexibility and rapid reaction. You don't have that by people on foot or in broken down vehicles. So they do not have, did not have at that time, any aircraft that could operate in a counterinsurgency role. And we supplied it.
And that contract is due to come to an end when? Early April?
On the 6th of April, yes.
And your contract is not going to be renewed?
I can't answer that. I don't know. We're working on going home on the 6th. When we leave, it is absolutely written in tablets of stone that there's nobody else can do the fighting.
What do you mean by that?
Well, they don't have the effort that works in the Mozambique army at this time because the new equipment that they've got from the other contractor that they've hired is not yet ready to move. So there'll be a huge gap between my leaving and any possibility of the new organisation being able to be effective.
And in that context, how would you describe the current state of the Mozambique army? Are they poorly led? Are they demoralised as a result of not being able to make any headway with this insurgency?
They're under-equipped and very demoralised because they've got no equipment, and the leadership has no experience of this at this time.
I wonder how you would respond to the Amnesty International report published earlier this month, which alleges that your forces clearly violated international humanitarian law by firing indiscriminately into crowds and attacking civilian infrastructure, including a hospital, and failing to distinguish between military and civilian targets.
How do I react to that? I tell you, we have sent 2 lawyers and a large group of people, including a senior British policeman and a lady, there to go and look at all the evidence that we have to indicate that that is absolute from Amnesty International. Every sortie that we've ever done in Mozambique is recorded at the end of the day with a grid reference, GPS position and a contact report. Every sortie that we fly has a senior Mozambican military or police person with us, normally a general, and he says we can pull the trigger or not. On a number of occasions, my pilots have said, I'm not going to shoot because I can't make out what it is. So that is the start of my reply to that. I think that what worries me is that Amnesty International did a desktop study of a problem and spoke to some people over a short period of time. We are going to do a study and are busy doing a study where we'll actually go and our lawyers that we have sent out there and told them to tell it as it is. If we are as bad as they say we are, well, let it be. But I must say to you that we were shocked, and it seemed to me almost a hatchet job because, it just didn't make any sense what they found people to say. Attacking a hospital, they didn't go into the detail of that. That did happen, yes. The hospital was occupied and engaging us with gunfire by a group of terrorists that had gone in there. We spoke to the general that was with us, and he said take them out, and we did, because we were taking a lot of heavy fire from the hospital, which might not be allowed in terms of any convention you'd like to think about.
That was Lionel Dyke of the Dyke Advisory Group, still under contract to the Mozambican government. Before the end of the programme, we will also hear from a bishop who has been speaking to some of the thousands of people who have fled Palma. Do stay with us for that. You're listening to the BBC World Service. I'm Razia Iqbal. This is NewsHour. This is Razia Iqbal with NewsHour live from the BBC in London. It is possibly the highest profile police trial in the history of the United States. Opening arguments begin today in the trial of the white police officer, Derek Chauvin, accused of killing George Floyd, who was black, in Minneapolis last year. The knee of the officer pressing on George Floyd's neck was captured on video and sparked worldwide protests against racial injustice. Derek Chauvin faces murder and manslaughter charges. Police officers in the US are rarely convicted for how they use force. From Minneapolis, Barbara Pletasher reports.
I'm going to go ahead at the roundabout. Look at how I've positioned my car. I'm to the left. I'm checking my right door mirror here. Signaling to come off, checking my door mirrors again.
This is Razia Iqbal with News Hour live from the BBC. It is possibly the highest profile police trial in the history of the United States. Opening arguments begin today in the trial of the white police officer, Derek Chauvin, accused of killing George Floyd, who was black, in Minneapolis last year. The knee of the officer pressing on George Floyd's neck was captured on video and sparked worldwide protests against racial injustice. Derek Chauvin faces murder and manslaughter charges. Police officers in the US are rarely convicted for how they use force. From Minneapolis, Barbara Pletasher reports.
What do we want? Justice! What do we want it now? For who? Justice!
This is the moment towards which months of protests have been building. The trial that's been described as one of the most important in American history.
Because they keep talking about the trial of the century, right? Usually trials of the centuries are like things that are like in the middle and like controversial. That's controversial. Keep hands down the video.
That's what turned the death of George Floyd into a global cause.
Keep an eye on this man that's going over the line, getting very close.
Derek Chauvin, with his knee on the black man's neck for more than 9 minutes.
He's not responsive right now, bro.
Bystanders watched him expire in real time. It will be an important part of the prosecution's case.
Is he breathing right now? Check his pulse. Check his pulse.
With such powerful evidence, it seems to many that a conviction should be obvious. But the defense is expected to argue that Mr. Chauvin was doing what he'd been trained to do.
When I was training, or when I was a young officer, I used it. I found it to be valuable, but I never put any pressure on the knee at all.
Mylan Masson is a retired police officer and an expert in use of force tactics.
Because we're not making much progress in the right-hand side lane, I'm going to come back into the lane on the left. Travel at an appropriate speed, but if I feel like I'm not making progress, I'll go back into that lane to make progress. And the reason for that, if you look 10, 15 cars ahead, you'll see there's a car that's just going far too slow. He's holding everyone back. You can see him there. You can see the BMW that's undertaken the vehicle. It's a white coloured Golf, the convertible with no roof.
Landmark in the city. It was built to fulfill the vision of Prince Albert, husband of Queen Victoria, to promote the appreciation of the arts, and was completed 10 years after his death. I've been speaking to Elizabeth Harper. She is the archive manager at the Royal Albert Hall. She's been telling me about what happened on this day 150 years ago.
Queen Victoria came to the Royal Albert Hall in 1871 on this day, and there were almost 10,000 people packed into the Royal Albert Hall, which is just absolutely unbelievable because we only have just over 5,000 seats. Queen Victoria appeared wearing black, still in mourning for Prince Albert. She went up to the stage surrounded by her family, and the hall had been the vision of her late husband, Prince Albert. And she writes in her diary that she found it too emotional to talk. So it was actually her son, the Prince of Wales, who stepped forward.
Now I can see a fire engine in the back. I can see him through my rear view mirror. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slowly start moving to like...
Diverse. Some bizarre things are, for instance, the world's first sci-fi convention that was held here in 1891. It was called the Vrillard Bazaar.
I'm still moving because I don't want to block traffic.
Members of the audience dressing up.
And this way it just lets the fire engine go.
Dog. There was a stall selling Bovril. It wasn't
I didn't stop. I saw him from a distance. And I'm looking in the rear view mirror to see if there's anyone else. Perhaps a convoy, maybe one or two of them. Especially with ambulances, you'll get a first responder and then you'll get another ambulance possibly following. The speed limit now is 20.
What about things beyond the very strange? There's certainly been quite serious politics inside.
I've had almost every spectrum of the political.
And what you can hear there is somebody opening up their engine. Again, if you don't understand what that word means, you're not paying attention to your lessons.
And it was the Royal Albert Hall that the suffragettes, Evelyn Pankhurst herself,
It is what it is. You remain at 20 until you're through this.
Between 1908 and 1913, and they absolutely loved the Royal Albert Hall. They saw it as their home, and it was here that they raised lots and lots of their fundraising.
What about more recently? The pop star John Lennon caused quite a stir.
Yes, so in 1968, one of the
Very busy roundabout. Make sure you time your entry correctly. Again, you're looking for something to develop, not when it's developed. So you're looking for developing.
The BBC Prom, still the world's largest classical music festival.
Yes, so the BBC Prom came through in 1941 because in World War II the Queen's Hall, its former home, was bombed. So Henry built the Royal Albert Hall, which was a much bigger venue. It was a bit scarce, and couldn't fill it.
I'm now going to find a safe place to park on the left.
1941 season, he was
I'm going to park after the blue car. You need to be aware that he can't see you. I'm going to park near this black car now. Check my mirrors, put my signal on. I've reduced my speed anyway. Come to a gentle stop, go into park, apply my handbrake, and then I'm going to turn everything off.
The Royal Albert Hall. Well, to mark this anniversary, let's hear